Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today I'm just so honored and appreciative to have Paul Selig with us. Paul is considered to be one of the most foremost spiritual channels working today. In his 9 breakthrough books of channeled literature, including I Am the Word, the Book of Mastery, Beyond the Known Trilogy, Realization, Alchemy, and the Kingdom, author and medium Paul Selig has recorded an extraordinary program for personal and planetary evolution as humankind awakens to its own divine nature. Paul's work has been featured on ABC News Nightline, Fox News, the Biography Channel's The Unexplained, and Gaiam TV's Beyond Belief. Paul, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I would love for us to start with a better understanding of what planetary evolution means and how does that look different for, let's say, our guides and those above that are looking down on us, helping us to elevate versus what we think planetary evolution is, or elevation even.
I had no idea. Planetary evolution, I think, was my first editor's descriptor for the work that I was doing, and that's what's ended up in text, to describe the books. I think it's accurate. I can talk about what I believe it may mean. The guides are teaching individual evolution, individual realization, but they're not doing this. It's not self-help. They're really teaching this so that we're actually participatory to a much larger act that they say is occurring, which is, a new awareness of who and what we are beyond an old existing paradigm that really has its foundation based in fear. And so the level of consciousness that they say that they're bringing us to or supporting us in is a unity consciousness. It's really not a dualistic paradigm as I understand it. So how we're perceiving this, I think, is we're moving from a sense of individual self to sort of a pluralized or collective sense of agreement to the inherent divine that must be in all things or nothing at all, which is how they describe it. How it looks to the guides, that actually is a really interesting question. I probably have to ask them. But they're saying that this is an opportunity. This is a real opportunity for all of us. They also say, which I found interesting, because I didn't used to hear this, that humanity has decided collectively to take a step forward. We still have individual will and, we can do what we want. But the collective has sort of agreed to this transition. And what they've said is, we're in this great wave of change. And they've been saying this, by the way, since 2009 with the very first book, when they said humanity is at a time of reckoning. And a lot of what they've talked about has sort of foretold the collective experience that we seem to be having about now. But that this collective wave of change is something that we get to ride. And it brings us to a higher place. We don't have to fight it. It's not about restoring what was. Although we're going to try to do that because that's what you do, when you're in a stormy sea, is you hold on to the most solid thing you can find. But I'm understanding that this is a positive change that we're undergoing. And it really does mean that we move to a new foundation. They call that foundation. Their language for it is the upper room, which is just another level of consciousness that they're saying is available to us and can be aligned to. Through individual will and certainly through the collective ability to choose something beyond what we've been taught we're allowed.
I love that this is a positive time. I feel that's true. There are other channels, mediums, and folks who are connected who are delivering that same message. I think first of all, who comes to mind is Lee Carroll. He channels Cryon, and there's this great parable that Cryon shared through Lee around this fish tank that's being renovated in a way because the whole apartment is being renovated and it's too big of a fish tank to move. So the fish in there don't understand that there are humans outside of the fish tank. They don't understand that the food is being dropped by the humans when the board is put on top, and there's all this commotion going on with stuff shaking and vibrating and stuff like that. They don't realize that the apartment is being renovated, that new cabinetry is being put in, and so forth. So
Yeah.
they don't have the context, and they all get all freaked out.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of fear. But what's really happening is quite beautiful, and it's a whole new world. And at the end of it, after the renovation's complete and the owner moves back in and removes the board, and everything comes back to stability, it's like it's all new. It's not just we're back to normal. And that's how it is for us. We don't see outside of our fish tank, that there's a much bigger picture. And I'm curious to hear what was your moment of recognition, realization that this is not our physical reality as we tend to think of it. This is like a simulation of sorts, or it's a movie that stars me, the person who's in the pilot seat, because I happen to be the observer. And so my positivity, my faith, my certainty, those define to a large degree my experience and the experience of the entire universe. In the multiverse, it's my universe that I'm piloting. So what was that moment for you where you're like, wow, this is not anything like what I first anticipated? Is it something that you've had since childhood? Like you started being able to see and hear things?
No, not
Was
at
there
all.
a certain moment where you woke up after a dream or after praying or something, and it's like a whole new realization? How did that transpire for you?
Well, I mean, it's been a process and it's an ongoing process. There was a sort of radical break in my understanding of reality when I was 25. And I was, a hard partying kid about a year out of Yale grad school, and, was wonderfully, I thought, self destructive. I thought it was kind of a wonderful way to be in the world. But I was sort of bottoming out in a hotel room in St. Paul, a Gopher Campus Motor Lodge. I was working on a project there. And the Gideons leave these books in the drawers, and that night I pulled it out and it said prayer for people in crisis. And I was raised an atheist pretty much. So I was interested in the paranormal, but the idea of God was for other people. It wasn't for me. I didn't know what a spiritual life was. I didn't know why you would want one. I didn't know it could even be had. But I said this stupid prayer and then I let it go. And 3 days later, I was back in New York and I woke up in the morning and I asked myself what I could do that day that was positive, and I heard a voice and it told me. And that was the first one. And then everything changed. And so for me to go from a world where there is no such thing as source or God or spirit, whatever you want to call it, I don't care what people call it, to one in which there was the equivalent of moving to another planet. It was totally different. It made no sense to anybody that I knew that suddenly this was where I was at. And then I had this experience maybe 4 or 5 months later. There was this thing happening people were calling the harmonic convergence. I heard people are going to be waking up. And I thought, well, if there is a God and you ask to be woken up, why would it want to say no? I mean, it was really completely innocent, but I didn't carry a lot of baggage. So I went up to the roof of the building that I lived in and tried to teach myself to meditate. Somebody had given me a crystal and a mantra, and I thought, you need these things to wake up. So I tried. It was the first time I was sitting there doing this mantra, and I felt this energy start to move through me. And I didn't know this. It was a Kundalini mantra. I didn't even know what Kundalini was. But I had an experience of energy moving through my body, and it sort of left me frozen. And I always say I just may have been hyperventilating because of the breath work. I have no idea what happened, but I was there. I was rocking in this energy, and it was palpable for me. And I think given where I had come from, I needed something palpable. And oddly, the work that I do with my guides has always been very palpable for people. The energy comes through in ways that can be experienced and felt. And the books are transmissions for this. So that was the beginning. And then everything else has been an unraveling of who I thought I was. and letting go of my ideas of what the world is and what's important. So I don't claim to be awakened or ascended. And I find that most people who do claim that probably are speaking about, from an egoic state. The people that I've met that I think are that awake aren't talking about it. They don't need to. They just are being it, and I've seen that in people that probably have no formal spiritual life at all, but just are operating at that level of faith and trust and agreement to whatever is before them. So I don't know that there was a moment. I still don't know that there's a moment for this. When I'm working, I know that this is all real because the phenomena around it is impactful to me and has been deeply impactful in my life. But I don't feel that somebody turned a switch on and suddenly I was there and awakened, knew everything, because I don't. I always have to say, I'm not a spiritual teacher and I'm certainly not a guru and I don't want that stuff. I have this odd ability that I show up for very consistently. And I was showing up for this consistently when I had 3 or 5 people coming to sit in my living room for 18 years, putting $10 in a basket. I mean, that's how this really began. I was really trained for the work that I do now, and it took time. It wasn't an immediate thing like, oh, here we are, we're a channel, let's go have a career. I had to be dragged out kicking and screaming from my academic closet to do this stuff publicly. And that's only 6 years ago that I left that life to say, okay, this is your work now. This is what you're doing.
So it was a 10 or 18 year overnight success.
Yeah, it's not even an overnight success. It's an ongoing process. It really is. I don't know. I have friends that say, well, don't you want to be awakened in this lifetime? And, when I've done workshops and people have raised their hands to ask my guides, and the person says, I just want to know that this is my last lifetime, that I don't have to come back. And then the guides say, well, then you get to come back because you're still refusing to be here at a certain level, that the whole idea is that this is something to be escaped as opposed to something to realize yourself through, that it's an opportunity to learn. I think that's what life is in some ways. It's opportunity. It's not always what we say it should look like. In my case, it certainly has not been in any way, shape, or form what I said it should look like. But do I feel that I'm in some hologram that I'm creating? No, I think I'm in a collective field that I contribute to. And one of the things that infuriates me at times about the new age is people say, I'm creating everything. But you know what? If you're living in a town where the water is polluted and people are getting sick from the water, you're in a collective agreement to be in a world where people can poison the water and get away with it. And there's choices that we make collectively that are creating a shared reality. We're all contributing to everything we see through the consciousness that we hold it. And I really do believe that we do co-create. But I'm not so much on the side that we're the director of all things, because I think there's free will. And if I step on your foot, you have every right to say, get the hell off my foot, and it's your reality. You got to get to say no, just as I got to say, okay, I'm going to do that and pay the price.
Let's talk about free will, because there's so much depth to that concept. And what I'm learning in Kabbalah is that free will really exists in the space in between, in the moments where you make decisions to either be reactive or proactive. And everything is essentially already written. So you're acting out a movie or a play where all of the scenes have already been decided. The script is already written and you're acting it out. You might think that you're not, that you're getting to choose all these different things, but it's really in the moments where you get challenged or pushed into what seems like a corner, you get uncomfortable, and the reactive route, which is the route that most of us take in most situations, is the script that's already written. But the proactive route, not getting reactive, but pausing, making a different choice that is more thoughtful, loving, etc., is going to take you on a different path that is also written, but it's like an alternate timeline. So that is my understanding from a Kabbalistic perspective of free will. It's those moments where you choose to be proactive instead of reactive, and then all the other stuff, all the different chance meetings and the winning the lottery or not winning the lottery, all these different things were already preordained. What are your thoughts on, or what's your understanding of that?
I don't hear that. That's not what I'm told. But, I was reflecting on my life a couple of days ago, and I thought, none of it feels like an accident, how things have happened. And I can look at the breadcrumbs that were laid out that I followed to live the life I'm currently living. But I don't know that I agree with it, with as you're putting it, because and the guides I work with honor free will. They say we've been gifted with it,
Yes.
and that we do have choice, and that the action of fear is to claim more fear, and that every choice we make in fear contributes to all the fear that is. So we're doing that, and we have the opportunity to change our minds. Now, the guides talk about individual will and divine will. And individual will, I suspect, although I probably should try to get this directly from them, but I'm on my first cup of coffee today, so I don't know that I can channel well. My personality self, which the guides sometimes call the small self, there's nothing wrong with it, but basically everything it knows is born in historical data. These are the choices available to me because these are the choices that I've been taught are available. And so consequently, I'm always referencing this menu of cultural agreement about how it can be lived. I broke every rule that I taught. I didn't know you could talk to guides, and my practice as a psychic is telepathic. I sit there and I tune into people and I become them and I sort of look like them. It's just crazy. I didn't know that this could be so until it was happening, and then I had to stretch my understanding of what was normal to embrace this. Divine will, they talk about as the alignment to the true self. It's all really about alignment. And they talk about a braiding of the will in their teachings. So you've got the personality self, which is, I want to be successful. This is what success looks like. And so I'm going to aspire to what success looks like in this culture that defines success in certain ways. And then you have the divine self that actually knows who it is and doesn't need to have that reflection back to know its own value. And they talk about the braiding of the will, which I found really interesting. So the example that they used to give was, because I used to hear, thy will, not mine, be done. And that was helpful for me at a stage in my development to say, I don't know what's best, you handle it. That's whatever God is, you direct it. But then there's this other place that they come to, which is the unified will, which is up there with I and source, whatever that is, are operating as one. And that's the expression of the unified will. So you're not operating from a paradigm of separation. And that's where I understand they bring us to. Now, when they talk about that, they actually talk about being in one's knowing. That's just operating from your knowing. It's not trying to figure it out anymore through the data that's presented. It's operating from claircognizance, which is the awareness of the divine self. So I know for a fact that there were large choices that I made in my life that I knew not to make and that I paid dearly for them. Some of them, my guide said, not a good idea, and I went and did it anyway, and I got dropped on my head. Would I have had a different timeline or experience? Yeah, I really do think I would have. Did I learn through what I chose, and did it become part, and was it not integrated into the path of my life? Absolutely, it was. And is all useful, because all experience, I believe, is useful at the level of the soul, even if it's not what I say that I want. So, I think both things are true. I once was at a conference speaking, which I almost never do. And the person who was up at the conference right before me said in response to a question, there's no such thing as free will. And I went, uh-oh, because my guides got up after that, and then they channeled a whole lecture on why there was free will. And, and really you do choose what side of the bed you get out on. You really do. I choose to overeat, which is to my detriment. I know I can make other choices. And if I were to make other choices, I'd be a little bit healthier, I think. So that's how I'm framing it right now. But once I look back on it all, will I say, yeah, this has all been perfect? I think both things are true simultaneously at different levels of reality. Everything is perfect now, but it sure doesn't look like it. But if you look at it from a higher vantage point, you want to begin to understand sort of this cosmic dance that we're all engaging in, which has its own perfection. And I do believe that.
Yeah, I do too. So could you share an example or two of making a choice that in retrospect wasn't so good and you get dropped on your head for?
Yeah, I fell in love with the wrong person once when I was about 26 years old. And I prayed on it, and in those days for me to get an answer, I can't imagine how hard it must have been for my guides to get through to me, because the density of my field, it must have been like taking a jackhammer to get a message through. And I heard distinctly, end this now. And of course I didn't want to, because it was, and it took me about 2 years to get over that one. I think it would have taken me about 2 weeks if I'd listened. And there were professional things that I got sort of coerced into doing, in my earlier career that I would not have chosen. And I heard, or I knew it was going against myself in some way, and again, I learned what I will not do again. That was the value of it. I learned not to sign a contract that doesn't feel, healthy and supportive. I learned not to give my authority over to somebody who has a whole other agenda, for me or my work. And so these were things that I got to learn through. Did they all work out? So far, thank God they have, in some ways, I think. Had I married the person I could have married, or, 20 years ago, would I be living a different life? Probably yes, but I didn't. So I'm not having that life. I'm having something else.
So when you heard that voice say, end this now, was it in your voice, like your internal voice, or was it like a female voice, or how did these voices sound to you?
Well, when I'm channeling, it's a whole different experience now. At the very beginning, as I said, I wasn't expecting to hear anything. And no, it's not a voice in the room at all. That's a kind of clairaudience, but it's not how I demonstrate it. I have this active brain that's always sort of running stuff. It's like having a radio on, just static buzz all the time. And what happened? Monkey mind, yeah. But I had a really loud one, especially in those days. We used to call it the committee. I had a loud committee. And what it was like when I heard to get my act together, which was the first thing I heard. And then the second thing I think I heard was don't pursue this relationship. It's like a thought that stops all other thoughts. It's like it parts the waves of the chatter and it overrides it. And it has a texture to it, a different resonant tone. And the tone is, and I wouldn't have known this at the time, but it was the tone of knowing. And the guides I work with say the small self thinks, the true self knows. And when they've defined that, it's pretty easy. When you're really in your knowing, there is never a question, even if it's what you don't want to know. I know it's time for the relationship to end. I know this isn't a healthy situation for me. I know. When you have those moments of knowing, they're rarely convenient to what we want at the level of personality. But whenever, and think about it, I mean, we've all had knowing, moments of knowing. You go into your, you just remember what it was like. Probably there was no question attached. So that was how it began. When I first began channeling or hearing, it was always for other people. I was working as an energy healer, which I had done. I was a college professor, but I had this other life pursuing my esoteric interests, and I was studying. I had studied a form of energy healing, and I was volunteering at a center. And it was the early 90s. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York City. People were dying right, left, and sideways. There was no medical treatment, and these little pop-ups were starting in Manhattan and all over. There were some in LA to provide alternative services. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I began to hear things for them. So if I had my hand in your chest, I heard the name Arthur, and I'm not thinking of any Arthur. And it would, the same thing would just interrupt the chatter. I learned to say, who's Arthur? And you might say, my lover, my father, my dog, my best friend, the man who beat me up when I was 20, whatever. And that would prompt an energetic release. And as I continued to get confirmation from the people that I was working with that the information was accurate, I began to trust it more. And so what I was doing was finding a station that I could trust, like a radio station. And then I could align to that station. And when I sat down to do a group in my apartment, it started, I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't expecting to channel. I was just going to do a meditation with energy, like my old teacher used to do. And the very first time I started getting instructions, and I was appalled. I'm like, I think I'm hearing this. I think I'm hearing that. And people would say, just say what you're hearing. And that's how I learned to do this, because there was energy that would come back in response to the instructions. So if I'm sitting in a group of people and I'm hearing from the guide or whoever's coming through, we're going to put a hand on your foreheads. And then the whole room goes like that. I mean, it's like Beetlejuice, we're all going, what the heck is this? I got enough confirmation for the information that allowed me to trust it. I was, by the way, never interested in the information that was coming through me. I was only interested in the energy. And it wasn't until I was 1998, when I was in my late 40s, and I quit smoking after many years, that the guides began lecturing through me. And all I knew was that I was talking more. That's all I knew. Well, there's a lot more talk tonight. I don't know what this is about. And it wasn't until I began recording and transcribing, which another medium forced me to do. They were so appalled that I wasn't doing that I realized what was coming out were coherent lectures. And the moment I became willing to do that, they began dictating books. And they haven't stopped. There's 10 now. The 10th one is done. But the experience of the voice, sometimes there's an accent, sometimes there's not. Sometimes it feels abrupt and a little shouty. Sometimes it's terribly graceful. Once in a while, it feels more female, but only because the reference points that are being used seem to have some context in a kind of domesticity that would have been more appropriate, in another age, say, that you would say. When I'm hearing lectures that are using illustrations about embroidery and baking, it's all very domestic, kitchen, hearth-toned, and other guides don't use that language. But I have no idea of the gender of who's working. It feels male, it feels female, it feels both at once as well. So it's evolved as I've done it. Long answer to a short question.
For me, I hear, I have clairaudience, and I hear it in my own voice, my own internal voice. And I didn't know if that was normal or not. This is all new for me. I hadn't been receiving psychic stuff in previous years. This is all just this year. And I started watching a show on Netflix called Manifest, and they all hear their callings in their own voice. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how it normally shows up. It's not in some booming fatherly male voice or in a female voice or whatever. It's in your own voice. Okay, that that tracks with my experience. Then I started binge watching that show, and I realized this is not my highest best use. I need to stop watching Netflix.
Yeah. When I can get stuff when I read for people. I'm often here because I'm not as receded. I'm not the guides aren't coming through to teach. It's when I'm channeling, I imagine myself climbing into the backseat of a car and turning the wheel over to the guides. When I'm reading for someone, I'm sharing the front seat, and we may be passing the wheel back and forth. When I'm getting psychic information, I'm getting it in my own voice. When I'm hearing the guides, the difference is less voice than word choice and cadence for me. And when they started, which was after the first book, the second book and the recordings, which I have somewhere still, are all over the map in terms of the accent. Some days it sounded like an Irish brogue. Other times it was like Edinburgh. It was like crazy. What is this? And I couldn't figure out at the time whether the guides weren't just using another voice to create a distinction for me between me and them or not. And it still happens sometimes, although it's settled in. But what I find interesting with all of the books that were channeled over a decade, it's all in the same voice. There's one guy that likes to use the word dears, which is a word that I abhor. We'd like you to know dears. And I'm like, oh no. And that's the only quirk that I've experienced, except in the last book that hasn't out yet. I was doing a lecture. This is in front of a room full of people, where the guide said, I'm speaking today. And I always hear we. And I was like totally taken aback with this I'm speaking. I have much to say, and it was a great lecture and very funny. But this was the one who was talking about, her illustrations or its illustrations were when you put beads on it, when you applique a piece of fabric with beading and then you stretch the fabric, the beads will fall away. I'm like, hey, what the heck is this stuff? I don't, it's not my stuff, but it was so joyously adamant and it had its own. That one did come with an accent, I remember. It was rather Irish, that one. But anyway, I can't figure it out. I just show up. And I try not to judge it. I used to be mortified when there was an accent and I was channeling. I was like, oh no. But, I still whisper everything and repeat after all these years. Sometimes I don't, but almost always that's the delivery. And I had to get past this idea. Somebody once said to me early on, well, why don't you channel the right way? And it was like, and the guide said, as if there's a right way to do this. It makes no sense anyway that this is even happening. And occasionally when I see someone who's sitting in a lotus position saying, I'm calling through the energies of the so-and-so, I'm going, huh? Because my experience of it is not like that. It's quite physical. I don't watch other channels. Like most everybody, I think I've seen 5 minutes of two of the better known channels out there scrolling in my social media feed, but I don't read other people's stuff. And it's not that I don't agree with it. I just try to keep it clean for me, And when I hear so-and-so saying similar things as you did, I went, oh, that's good news. That's confirmation. That makes me feel nice. But when I saw Jane Roberts, who channeled Seth, I saw some old film of her, and I recognized it. I could see exactly what she was doing. It was like, yep, that's what it feels like. It is different. It isn't casual. It's a whole other. It's transmission. It's about being a radio and the radio doesn't judge the broadcast. Can't be effective if it is.
Yeah. I want to distinguish intuiting a book versus channeling a book. So I'm working on a book right now, and it's intuited. I'll get intuitive hits, and as you described, that you receive something, whether you hear it or see it or whatever. It's just like everything else stops. The monkey mind, all the chatter. It just ceases, and you don't have another thought pop in. It just stays put. Whereas if it's your subconscious mind, it goes to the next thought and the next thought and the next thought, bouncing around. Next thing you know, you're thinking about what's for dinner. So I just know that I'm supposed to be intuiting this book, because I'll get these hits and they're like, okay, that's the subtitle of the book. I love it. Okay, got to write that one down. and tons of things just come at different times. And sometimes it's when I'm least expecting it, and sometimes I have prepared myself to receive, and it's just that it comes in unexpected a lot of times.
Yeah.
But then channeling is supposed to happen for me for my second book. I didn't even know, first of all, that I'm supposed to do a book after this book, but okay, I'm supposed to do another book, and it's supposed to be channeled. So that's more like what you're talking about, how you get this content, and how Gene Roberts got the content from Seth. So how do you distinguish these two things? Do you end up having to prepare your vessel? Like you said, I had my cup of coffee or whatever. I don't know that I'm ready yet. How does this all work?
It's changed over the years. When I first started and I was starting to do groups, I felt like I had a tin can on a string, and I would show up and hope to God somebody else was talking into their end of the can. I was always terrified that I wouldn't be able to hear. And what happened once in that period was I heard we'd like permission to merge, and there was this big whoosh of energy, lasted about 20 minutes. And since then, I've never had to. I don't feel that anymore. It's always accessible, but it's, for me, literally the equivalent of turning a dial on a radio. So right now I'm with you. If I was reading you, you would be the station I would be tuned into. And then I'm hearing your thoughts and your emotions. And if you ask about your partner or your sister or whatever, I'm tuning the station to them. They're the coordinate that I'm reading from. Inspiration is enormously important. All great art, I feel, is inspired art, whether it be music or painting or spiritual texts. There's a vast difference, I think, between inspired work and channeled work. And I'm a purist on this. And other people, I hear people say, oh, I channeled this painting, or I channeled this poem, or whatever. I think that they're probably meaning that they were inspired as they wrote it. And inspiration is high. And it's not to denigrate it at all. It's just different.
Yeah. It's like you're transcribing or dictating word for word what you're receiving, versus inspiration is like, wow, this feels like what I'm supposed to be working on, or it's more of a directional thing, not a word for word transcription.
Absolutely. See, if you're doing, I believe that inspired work can be crafted. You're given the idea for the story, but you're going to, execute the story. And you're going to go back and rewrite it and maybe work with an editor or something. In the books, first of all, I don't write my books. They're all spoken, and recorded. Yeah. And the recordings are transcribed, and now they're filmed. And they're the last 5 books, I think, maybe 6, were done in front of audiences. So they were done either online in groups or in workshops. And the guides will finish a lecture and say, this is in the book. Or sometimes they'll say, and this is not in the book, but they decide what goes in. The rule has always been, and some of the books were just, everything was for the book. The last book I just did, everything was for the book. It took 2 months of dictation. But in any of the books, maybe 2 words are changed, sometimes 3 in the entire manuscript, because I mispronounced them, or I was speaking so fast that I stumbled across an end, but you can usually catch it. And the reason for this is it's not my book to correct. It's not it. I mean, I've had people say, you need to go back and correct the book because you use the male pronoun. My guides are terribly inclusive. The genders, even I've had editors saying, Paul, the sentence begins with, she says this, and it ends with, and he's grateful for it. And that's intentional for them. It's frustrating. But, I've had people say, well, this was one. This was early on. Somebody wrote and said, you need to tell your guides to stop using the word Christ because it turns people off. I thought, I don't get to do that, I mean, honestly, I don't get to decide what they can say. And when I've tried to, you should hear what I get on the other side. Although I think they take the notes in some ways. If I'm uncomfortable with something, they're going to have to address it because they're going to have to work through me, and I'm a conscious channel. So I feel that's the key. It's about not editing and not rewriting. If it's a channel book, it's channeled. If it's an inspired book, it's inspired. It's no less than, I promise anybody, it's just a different way of approaching what the work is. And I think that we all have different capacity and different abilities and different gifts and ways of being worked with. And I think that that's part of the beauty of this. How I channel may not be how somebody else does it. And I would love to go back, truthfully, and write an inspired book that I'm the author of. But I don't consider myself to be the author of any of these books, although my name appears on the cover. It's I have no, weirdly, like when you finish a creative project, you go, oh, that was really great. You did a great job. I feel so realized. I don't get that. I go, oh, thank God that worked. They didn't contradict themselves. It all makes sense. Oh, thank God. It happened again. And that's my experience of doing these things. I'm literally I'm like a court stenographer when I'm doing this. I'm taking dictation. When was the last time you noticed the court stenographer? You just hear the testimony, and the guides are the ones, delivering the testimony. Occasionally, I'm interrupting, saying, "I don't understand this," or "This is confusing," or "Can you explain this?" Or they're going to say, "Paul is interrupting." And then they'll include that if they think it's useful, I think, for the reader, or if they need to do that to keep me on board and not interrupting the lecture again and again and again.
Now, you used the phrase conscious channel.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that you essentially step aside, but you're still present and you can interject if you disagree with something? Or does that mean that there are unconscious channels where their body is completely taken over and they're asleep, essentially?
Yeah, Edgar Casey was asleep when he was dictating his work. That was done in that way. I'm not there, and maybe it's because I don't want to. I whisper and repeat, and so I'm able to hear the teaching only in the repetitions. It's like I'm so busy taking dictation, and I hear phrase, 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 that I don't know where the whole lecture is going at all. I don't even know where the whole paragraph is going or the whole sentence is going. I may hear, on this day, you all need to hear, and I'm saying that, and they're starting to feed that the realization of humanity is, and I'm saying that, and it's just like this ongoing loop of dictation for me. Now, when I don't repeat, I don't remember what I said. And that's frightening to me a little bit. It's kind of like it all just becomes sound and vowels and consonants and tones. And I may go to a place where that's where I work eventually. It's happened publicly before. There was one workshop I delivered at a lecture in Mexico. And on the recording of that, by the end of the lecture, I was just making vowel sounds. It was like, ah, oh, they were toning, but I didn't know at that point what toning was because they now do it intentionally. But it just would be the idea of my context of language just fell apart at a certain point. So if you think of it, I'm mostly in the back seat of the car, hopefully reading a magazine, like occupying myself just with keeping up with the action of the dictation. But if I were to hear from the back seat, and today we were going to tell you that the moon was made of green cheese, I'd perk up and go, excuse me, what? And that's the extent of my involvement. I work the way that I work. It seems to allow for consistency. I'm still developing, I feel, truthfully. I really do. How I work is still developing. The books have only been coming through for 10 years. And I think they've gotten much better at delivering books through me because you can't read these. You read these books and it seems as if they were written. And they weren't. They were all just talked with no editing. So, whenever I sort of doubt this whole phenomena, and there have been times I go, how can this really be happening? I go, I don't care how eloquent I might be, I'm not capable of dictating 10 books that don't require any editing.
Yeah.
And there's a lecture that just went up online last week, which I'd forgotten about, which was from the last book, The Kingdom. And I almost never watch them, but I watched this one because I'd forgotten the lecture. And I was astonished by it, only because it was so fast and intense and really beautifully woven. You know, I couldn't write a good college essay where you had to have a thesis statement. I couldn't stand those things, but they're doing it in their own strange way.
Mm. Now, you were asked by your guides or whoever was channeling through you, the collective that was, that you were working with. We would like permission to merge. Do they ask you for permission every time, or is this now like a blanket permission? They don't need to ask you.
It wasn't like that. I don't know what happened there. I think what they did was they created a link up that was present for me so that I wasn't feeling like I had to go find them somehow. Wow. And I don't know what happened beyond that. This is many, many years ago. This was when I was maybe 33 and I'm pushing 60 now. So no, I work. I don't meditate before I work. You know, sometimes I may if I can. But no, I work with a little prayer of protection that I've been working with since the very beginning. And when I'm saying that, I'm receding. I'm climbing into the back seat. I use that to step away. And then I will hear one phrase, just the very first phrase of whatever the dictation is, repeated incessantly. Like, on this night, we are going to address, and then I hear it 3 times, and then I say, on this night, we're going to address, and then whoosh, everything else comes flying out after it. And it doesn't stop until they're done. And then they'll say, stop now, please. Sometimes they'll say, Paul is tired. He wishes us to stop. We are not going to. And then they'll continue on. But no, I don't have a lot of prep, but I know people that are very good readers, and they meditate for half an hour before they talk to somebody on the phone and do a reading. And I'm just like, I just turn the radio to their station. That's it. I'm a radio. That's it.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know why when people say they want to channel, I often go, why? It's never gotten me a date. It's an odd skill set, but it's a skill set. And it's not about the channel. That's the whole trip with channeling. It's about at the very end of when I used to be a writer myself, I became briefly kind of a ghostwriter, which meant, and I got used to the idea, getting my name off the page. Just like, okay, somebody else gets credit. It's not about me. In retrospect, that was actually very helpful for me, because in my early days, I had a great investment in who people thought I was. Now people just may think I'm a kook, and I can live with that if I have to. There are worse things.
Yeah.
Okay. But hopefully they know that I'm honest, because I am. I just show up and do my thing.
Yep. Yep. Amazing. That prayer of protection that you pray all the time, is that something that's publicly available that we could maybe link to or share?
Well, I use the Unity Prayer of Protection, which was, and it's by a man named James Dillett Freeman. And I've used that because the very first healing circle I went to back in 1987, run by a woman named Nancy Mayens, who was the first person who introduced me to this work. She's now a well-respected teacher in her own right. She taught it to me, and I used it. And I added to it at the end. And I added, set the intention that you're only open and receptive to those energies and that information which are for your highest good in the perfect amounts needed for your healing and evolution at this time. And I added that because in my early days of channeling and bringing through energy, I wanted it big. I just thought, oh, let's make it. I was like, charismatic big, And then one night somebody keeled over from the energy. They just passed out. And I went, oh, hey, no more. He took too much. And it doesn't happen anymore. That was back in 92 or something like that. So I just those people who are saying, give me more. are going to say, you can have too much of anything and get a little nauseous from it. So,
Yeah.
but no, the prayer protection I just use, and not because I think that there are things to be frightened of, but I think it's important to set a common field where there's safety and trust in, the source of all things. And that's what I'm doing. It's not conjuring. It's really just setting the boundary for a shared field that we're willing to be inclusive of.
Yeah. And do you still read people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a practice. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Not as much as I used to, but I do. And the part of me that I do a lot, when I do a lot of online workshops now, because of traveling has been somewhat curtailed, and I'm always reading in those. The guides are lecturing, and then people are asking questions of the guides, or they're asking more psychic questions, which I address. But I keep the practice, I think, because in some ways I like the fact that so much of the reading stuff that I do is verifiable. If I tune into your mother and I start to sound like your mother, you go, okay, he's got my mother. And I go, okay, I can trust this. And that's always helped me to trust sort of the more extraordinary phenomena of the channeling and the spiritual teachings, which are a stretch for me to believe at times. It's not convenient stuff. None of this is easy self-help.
Yeah.
Go buy a crystal and float away. It's like, you want to change your life. This is one of the ways that will support you if you choose it.
Yeah. It's certainly a way to have some people in your circle not want to have anything to do with you. Like, oh, that person went over the deep end.
Do I get that? No, I don't really get. I mean, the funny thing with me, and I'm fortunate here, I come from a somewhat traditional background. I mean, I went to graduate school at Yale, and I taught at NYU for 25 years, and I'm not a new ager. I'm not a floaty kind of guy, really. I never really have been. And so I'm also published by mainstream publishers. I mean, Penguin did the first 6 books, and St. Martin's has been doing the others since then. But I don't worry about that in the same way that I used to, because you can't. Do you know what I mean? You can't. And there are people that I think that are doing this stuff that may be diluted, or may be, wanting it to be true or something else. And I think that those are stages that people go through. And I don't think, for the most part, people who are exploring it at that level are going to stick around with it. If you're really going to do this stuff, you're going to have to change. Mm-hmm. It's not a free ticket. Your shit's going to come up left, right, and sideways to be dealt with. It's part of the process here. And I think that's true with any spiritual path one is on. I don't think it's necessarily meant to be graceful and comfortable all the time.
Yeah. A couple really quick questions and we'll wrap up. Do you see angels or auras or anything supernatural, kind of visions or anything like that?
Less so than I used. I mean, with my eyes closed now, yes, I'll see more, and that's clairvoyance that way. But my third eye screen didn't develop until late. I mean, that was maybe 10 years ago or something. I started accessing visual information, Before then, I would see orbs, usually this beautiful sort of blue that you've never seen in this world before. This extraordinary blue orb, sometimes is purple, I would see. And auras, I can teach people how to see, the first layers. But when I've seen lots of stuff, I've been surprised because that's not normal for me. It's not my normal way of working. It's happened once in a while. I've been, wow, I'm really seeing all those, the colors. But, when I was a college teacher and I would get bored teaching, I'd say, who wants to learn how to see auras? And they go, okay. So you have a whole bunch of college students, and they were more clairvoyant than I was. There was some woman saying, why am I seeing a pinwheel over this person's forehead and a cone over the top of the head? And I said, well, those are chakras, and I don't see those, So people have capacity. People can do this stuff. They just don't know they can because perhaps nobody's just given them permission and said it could be so.
Yeah. There's a lot of social pressure to not believe in this stuff. So, but yet we're all
Less so.
psychic. We're all psychic.
Yeah, less so now, which is why I think we're having this conversation.
Yep.
15 years ago, no,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Last question. So you mentioned the Christ. How is the Christ different or the same to Jesus or to the Christ consciousness, which is another term that I've heard in New Age circles? Could you differentiate those?
I'll try. I mean, I know what the definitions that my guides use are for these things.
Mm-hmm.
And the guide's definition of the Christ has always been the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in material form. Sometimes they call it the monad. It's the seed of God that seeks its own resurrection through each of us. So they talk about Jesus as a personage of the Christ, a realization of the Christ, and they say that there have been others as well. I mean, basically, I get that all religions finally are taking us to the same place if you go to the seed of truth that is within them, not what necessarily has happened to them over the years through politics and economics and formalized structures. Christ consciousness is what the guides I work with call the upper room, which is a level of awareness that expresses beyond fear. The guides say that Christ is the true self. And the true self is always present, but it's operating at a higher level of vibration and tone. And they bring us there in their teachings, and they call that the upper room. And you align to the upper room through their invocation. They just teach us a way to get there. I'm sure there's other ways to get there too. And it's from this place that you're aligning to a level of vibration that does not operate in fear. The guides say fear doesn't exist at that level of vibration. And that's the big breakthrough. That's the level of, that's sort of breaking the big rule of collective reality. The guides I work with don't use the word matrix, but I suppose that's kind of what they're saying.
Right.
This collective field that we operate in that's been so fraught in fear. We're born into it. The guides say, pretty much it's like, you showed up in the pool where somebody already peed in, and you're used to it. You're so used to fear. And it's what you've chosen through for so long that you can't imagine what it's like to be beyond that. So, and they make a distinction between fear and prudence. They're big fans of prudence and discernment, which is, if it's raining, take an umbrella. That is a use of will. It doesn't mean you have to be frightened of the rain. It means you don't have to get wet if you don't want to.
Right. Wonderful. And so if our listener or viewer wanted to work with you, like get readings from you, I'm imagining pretty busy, pretty booked up, but if that's something that is available, how would they do that? And just generally, how would they learn?
Everything's on my website.
Okay.
Yeah, everything's up on my website, which is just my name. It's paulselig.com. And, there's an online booking thing, and there's somebody that deals with the appointments. I actually just show up for them when they are booked. I don't schedule them or have much say in that. I just show up.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul. This was really fun and enlightening and inspiring too. And I love what you're doing in the world. It's important work. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you, listener, for being you and for shining your light in the world. And we'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.